Thank you, Maya. I just want to acknowledge that the meeting started recording. I apologize that we didn't start that a little bit earlier. Tenzin, you had initially raised your hand and unmuted. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was gonna say that as a junior, especially, I graduated high school and started college during the lockdown. So for a lack of better words, I'll say that I definitely felt stunted when I actually started in-person classes. So I feel like something I'd wish the supervisors would know, and I think they know obviously that, a lot of us are still trying to figure out not only ourselves, but like our boundaries, kind of like our own problems and things like that. So just knowing that like while we do try to take our job seriously, it's like we do have other things that do take up our mind, and sometimes it can't get out of our head even if we want to. Like sometimes I know people say that you should put personal things aside when you're at work, but it's kind of hard when you are a college student and still haven't really figured out anything.
Yep. I don't want to speak for anyone else on the call, but I would imagine your supervisor probably feels that same way on some days where it's hard to switch mentally into job mode. Grace, this is no pressure, but I did want to invite you to answer if you're interested before we move on to our next question.
That's okay. I don't have anything for this one.
All right, sounds good. Well, I appreciate you all sharing. This next question is sort of for you to think about what you just shared, and then what can we learn from you as supervisors? So to get the best version of student employees, supervisors should, and whatever comes on top of mind, feel free to share.
I can start for this one. So I think like fostering a relaxed environment really helps. I think I speak for a lot of students when I say like it doesn't help to have like too strict of like a regimen, or I guess just restrictions in general on us. As most college students feel like we don't have a lot of time like on our hands for really anything, like aside from school. Like we do have a personal life and a lot of other things that we're juggling at the same time. So like I feel like just encouraging an environment that like we can talk to one another. We can always come in and speak to the supervisor without feeling like we might get disciplined for that. Like it's a big deal. I've mentioned like I'm part of our on-campus spaces program, which does stand for building academic, social, and emotional support, specifically for elementary age homeless children. So it is like a pretty tough program already, as you can probably imagine. And like there is a lot of like of an emotional side to it. So like having that comfortability to be able to speak with supervisors and other students in the program without feeling like we might get in trouble for that, or we might like not be following what the professor wants us to do, like that does really help. So I guess having that like both in our meetings and then just in general is something I think is really great.
Thank you, Grace.
I would say just like really try to get to know the students you're working with. Everybody kind of goes in with different motivations for going into the role they do. There are some people who are a lot more kind of like entrepreneurial in spirit and really want to be given a lot more tasks and responsibility. And I think like really like letting those people almost like take the reins and have that responsibility can be very fruitful for everybody. There's also people who are kind of just in it to make money and just kind of fulfill the roles and the basic responsibilities of the job. Knowing who those people are and kind of pairing them with the people who are kind of taking more of the leadership approach can be really successful in kind of creating a good team environment where you don't have people kind of like battling for different roles and whatnot. I think it's also really important, just like really getting to know the students in general, like understanding like when they might be like at their best and when they might be struggling a little bit, and like knowing that like knowing how to identify when a student might be in a place of struggle and reaching out to see what you can do to help. That can really make a huge difference. So I would just say all in all, really make sure you understand who you're working with and yeah, and developing close relationships when you can.
I would say like for me, Wish does a really good job at this already, and I really appreciate it, but just sort of getting the students involved in any way that they can to really get to know them. Sometimes there's that, generational gap, or, just there's a few differences. So I really appreciate when Wish sort of gives us like little icebreakers at the beginning of a group meeting, or when we have to like fill out Google Forms about our favorite color, favorite ice cream, things like that. Even the small things really count, such as, going in, saying hi, asking about people's day. It really gives that sense of community at the Office of Student Financial Aid. So, yeah.
If it's pretty similar to what's already been said, but like anything that's done to like help the supervisors like get to know the student employees, I feel like has made a big difference. And like in like the promotion interviews within member services, they often ask us like, what do you expect of us in this position? Like, how would you like us to communicate with you, or things like that, where like it is kind of individualized. So it's not just like an assumption of this position will be like learning or like communicated to in this way, but you can kind of see like what that student in particular like needs to like have a good understanding of what's expected of them, or like how they best like learn and like would learn that position, I guess, best, which has been really nice to know that like they understand everyone like kind of learns differently and like will approach the job a little differently. And having like the support in that like no way that you do that is like right or wrong, and then it might take some people longer to catch on to certain elements of the job than others, but like they know that like you're still trying and putting the effort, and just like understanding that the student has like good intentions even if somebody doesn't go right. I feel like the way it's been approached for me, where like when I was new to a position and I maybe did something wrong, they always waited until like the member had like gone away, so it wasn't like in front of a member that they like told me how to fix it, so it wasn't like an embarrassing thing. They were like, oh, it's like, here's how you should do it, and like this is why what you did wasn't maybe the best approach. So it's like just done in a comforting way where it doesn't feel like you're like punished or like not doing your job right if you did it wrong the first time that you tried something.
Thank you all. Those were great answers. Our next question, and thank you, Marcy, for the suggestion to put these in the chat. Our next question for you all is, are there practices or ways of working and interacting in your job setting that seem maybe outdated or irrelevant to you and other students in your generation? And then also the inverse of that question. So what in your workplace feels very relevant to your generation?
I'll start us off. So I would say like where I learn best is really through just kind of the work experience, like being in the situation rather than watching some of the training videos. I think like the training videos, like a lot of times they might be a little bit like longer and more tedious, hard to like keep my attention going. I would say one thing that's super relevant that like sometimes isn't like prioritized enough is really like interpersonal communication skills. I think we lost a lot of that when we shifted virtually, starting in like later 2020. So I think it's really important that students have as many opportunities as possible to connect with each other, be it like in the work setting or in like a training setting where like they understand who they're working with better, like how they can communicate. I think those skills are very useful regardless of whether it's inside the workplace or outside, and it lasts a lifetime. So I would say like making sure that you give people opportunities to communicate, especially like in an in-person setting. That's so valuable, but I think like a lot of times overlooked in this digital world we're living in.
Thank you, Sam. Does anyone else have thoughts or reflections? What seems really relevant, or what seems maybe like it's not quite as relevant for your generation in the workplace?
I feel like the amount of student feedback that I've felt was like received and prioritized within member services has been, I think, relevant to our generation, and just like not letting us feel like we don't have a voice because we're like the younger ones, we're the students, and we're not like the pro staff. has been really like impactful in us feeling like what we're doing like is, I guess, like having an impact, and like what we're seeing even when like person isn't present is like considered in like the decisions that we're not a part of. And also having like the mini competition woven into like how we function. We have like buddy bunch groups, and it's a way to like outside of the shift, like try to get people that you work with to just get to know each other, and then it kind of turns into a competition, and it gets really heated and people take it very seriously. And it's probably the best kind of like coworker bonding I've ever seen done in a job.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that idea, Maya. You're making me want to work at Recwell. Other thoughts?
Right,
well,
I'll go ahead and throw the next question in the chat. What skills do you and your peers have that, if you had the time and opportunity, could change your workplace for the better?
So within the wellness coaching space, we focused a lot of our training on mindfulness and just like being aware of the present moment and understanding how to respond to your emotions, be it positive or negative. I think that's incredibly valuable. It's like really kind of changed how I approach daily situations. I've definitely noticed my like stress level has gone down significantly, be it like in the classroom or like in a work setting, whatnot. I think that's super valuable. I think something that would also be really great, it's pretty hard to like teach and instill, but really compassion and like the general notion that you want what's best for everybody, and you understand that everybody's trying to pursue a common goal in the work you're doing can be super valuable too, for getting everybody on the same page. That said, it's pretty difficult to try to instill that, but I think there are definitely practices that can help get people kind of along those lines, especially like helping people understand to like embrace each other's differences and know that we all have a lot of commonalities at the end of the day. And if we really embrace those, we can create a lot of great things.
For me, this question kind of makes me think about how like in certain cases you kind of need to be like a little tech savvy to I don't know, be in like the WISH community or the Office of Student Financial Aid, just because we spend most of our time, you know, on computers or in a phone call, forwarding emails, or at least for me personally, you know, making emails, working on cases, trying to make portfolios. And it's a lot of, you know, technical terms, a lot of technical things that go on within WISH. And I feel like one thing that I'm really grateful is the amount of knowledge that I'm able to gain over the course of weeks and months, and how, you know, knowledge sort of like progresses. I remember starting in September, it was all new to me. I honestly did not know if I could make it because everything seemed so complicated to me. This whole, you know, organization and computer system was just so new to me that I was freaking out, but I was walked through it, and I was able to gain more knowledge in terms of how to, you know, use WISH, how to do certain things that I wasn't able to do before. And I think that's really present in like each of the students that work there. You know, they gain skills through you know, experience and time. And I feel like as time progresses, that really, you know, makes a difference. So.
Thank you all. Any last thoughts on that question before we jump to the next one? Right, and supervisors, I see some folks have started to put questions in the chat. So just a reminder that you can pop those in there, and then later in our time, we'll be able to ask the students those questions. But for students right now, we are curious. Tell us about a time when you felt really motivated or engaged in work. What was that like? And what kinds of things helped you feel that way?
Um, for me, our front desk, a lot of the times we have like friendly competitions when it comes to the amount of emails that can be sent. I know one of our coworkers like was like, "Oh, I'm gonna send this much," and then we all were like, "No, we're gonna try to beat you." Um, and there's also times where like we get incentives of like, "Oh, if you get it down to this many emails, we'll buy you Milios or something like that." And I know that's not sustainable. I mean, if every time we had to do that, someone had to buy us a meal, it didn't seem that smart. But I think just being rewarded or being acknowledged that the work that we're doing is helpful. Obviously that doesn't mean like babying us and like telling us like, oh, so great, blah blah blah, but like just having like a kind of like a pat on the back of like what we're doing is helpful, gets us really motivated to continue on with it. So encouragement and things like that, which could be the answer to the previous question as well, but like yeah.
We have like weekly update emails, and in them, like supervisors or anyone on shift can kind of like shout out other positions. I just say what they were doing well, give praise to any employee that they worked with. And I know that like my first semester as an ace, when I kind of felt like what I was doing, because like that position, you're kind of limited in what you can do just because you're newest to the position. And so I always felt like what I was doing maybe like wasn't helpful enough because I couldn't help in ways that the other positions could. And so just like getting recognized in those emails, even though it was small, like just like meant something to me when I was first starting and like getting to know people still.
Kind of echoing what's already been said. Yeah, I think it's like proven that recognition is one of the most powerful motivators. And like knowing when to implement recognition can be super valuable, and encouraging people to keep doing great work. I would say like what has really been like most impactful though is just kind of the feeling that I'm making a positive difference. When I was at like the NIC as a member services supervisor, honestly, like my favorite thing was when somebody would get locked out of their locker, because like that gives you 5 minutes to get to know somebody, ask how their day is going, help them like unlock the lock. Like it's simple, but it can go a long way, especially for somebody who might just be having a tough day and need somebody to talk to. You could make like a big difference. And like the same with like, if you find somebody's AirPods on the ground and like you could call them up and be like, hey, like we found these, like I've heard so many great sighs of relief when I like had that phone call back at the NIC. I really like that. And then with wellness coaching, I just think like the training has been so powerful because it's taught me how to have really strong, deep and insightful conversations with people. Like how I can reframe questions better, how I can like approach their answers, and like how I can just be a better listener overall. I think like knowing that the work that I'm doing can create a positive difference is what motivates me more than anything else in the world. So I'm very grateful for those opportunities.
I'm hearing kind of a theme where a lot of us are noticing that we feel really motivated when we know that our work is important and it's making an impact. The things that we do are making someone else's experience better. So I'm appreciating you all for sharing that.
I have to agree with Brenda. I'm also hearing that a great way to hear that is through recognition, right? Is, hey, how am I know if I am doing the right thing? How am I making positive impacts? And so I appreciate you all for sharing. So we have one last question prepared for you all. Tell us about a time when your supervisor supported you well.
I can start. When I was at the NIC, I'm gonna give a shout out to Alec. He was my supervisor, and as like a sophomore, I like put way too much on my plate, and I didn't really do a good job of taking care of myself. And I like quickly got burnt out. that second semester, and I was pretty candid about it. It was like difficult to do, but I like reached out to Alec and I was like, hey, I'm just like really struggling. Like I need some time off. And he was able to kind of like reduce my hours. And ultimately I decided like what was best for me and for my mental health was to like leave the position. And he was like very helpful with like making sure that that was okay. And also like following up with me, like understanding like if there was anything he could do to help out in my situation. Like I felt like I left and it was like a really positive note where I didn't feel guilty about leaving. Like I never felt bad about what I was like doing, like made me feel comfortable in future instances, being willing to admit like, hey, I need to step back. So I'll say that was a great instance of support.
For me, I feel like, coming into Wish, like my first year, trying to get, adjusted not only to the system, but the school as well. Jen has been a huge amount of help for me, not only, with trying to understand how, Wish works, but also in terms of, being an aid that I can come to when it, comes to my schoolwork, maybe personal issues, friends, trying to get adjusted. There was one instance where, I was probably not doing the best in school. It was a whole new environment to me, and I didn't really know who to turn to. I hadn't really adjusted very well at UW, and I felt as though I could, turn to Jen, not only as like, my supervisor, but as a friend, as an older sister that I could, talk to. So it was really comforting to know that.
This is kind of another shout out to Alec and also Shayna, who I don't think is on this, but if she gets it. But when I first started working at the NIC, I kind of mentioned in like my preferences for like scheduling, which like aren't always able to be honored because there's so many of us and only so much time to schedule us. But I had put how like with my ADHD working in the morning is better because of when my medication is like most functional. And they made sure to like accommodate that. And like when my schedule got changed, they like asked how it was going, or if I wrote it in my feedback form, like how I was feeling by comparison. Like they just kind of followed up on that and have asked ever since, like if that's something that I wanted to be considered in other like semesters with new schedules. And I really appreciated that. And just like they stayed mindful of that, even if I hadn't like brought it up in a while.
I guess I don't have like one specific time, but I think with my program, my professor's really excellent with like organizing our weekly check-ins. Most people here have some sort of check-in, I would assume regularly. And like, I think it's just really great to be able to not only talk about what you're experiencing like that week, but just to be able to talk about the things you're going through like in your life, like not only just in the program or work or job you're doing. So I would say that's definitely a way that I feel supported, especially in an organization that does kind of have a toll over time. And then just knowing that that relationship is there for you if you ever need to talk to someone is just also really great.
I would agree that with pretty much what anyone said, but just knowing that like when things come up and you, like I said, you learn more about yourself. So like in my situation, like similarly, I also have issues with focusing on things and such. And so when you start medication or just start anything new in your life, that it's not only new for you, it's still something that's going to affect your job as well, in some ways. And so having a supervisor like I had and have, that can understand that and can take that into consideration and support you as much as they can, while also, you still do have a responsibility. And I think we all know that we do have a responsibility, even though we have these things that happen in our life. So just having a good middle ground where we can all just, agree that this is best for us is very helpful.
Thank you all. I know I have learned a lot from listening to you all, and I'm already calculating when can I go back and listen to this recording again, because I want it to sink in a little bit more. We do have some questions that have popped up in the chat. So I am actually going to turn it over to Allie, who is one of the We Grow steering committee members. And she is going to ask a few more questions.
Thanks, Brenda, and thanks to all of these incredible students who have been so kind to share your candid thoughts. It's been really beneficial, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts on these next couple questions. Our first one is from Jennifer. Her question was, if I need to talk with you about fixing a situation at work or improving yourself in the job, how would I best approach this with you, especially without any fear of you being disciplined? And I noticed that Grace had an awesome response in the chat as well. She said, I feel like a private conversation and a regularly scheduled check-in is the best way to approach it, mixing in a dose of positive and improvement points like you're doing great with, but I was hoping to talk to you about X helps a lot. So thank you, Grace, for that. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this?
I sent it privately, but I guess I can share this for everyone since it is helpful. I also just don't know how Zoom chat works, so I didn't know how to send it to everyone at the time. But for me, a lot of the times I pick up a lot on body language. And so whether or not someone's just being like passive aggressive and kind of like, putting me down while explaining it is very different than someone who I can tell physically is just really trying to help me be a better member of the workplace and like to be a more productive member. So yeah, like I said in the chat that like it's a lot of like facial expressions and how someone brings it up. I know a lot of people might have problems with facial expressions and things like that. I know a lot of people just kind of like straight faces and it means nothing in reality, but like to students, it means that like, oh, are they like saying something negative about me? Is it like, is there a bigger problem? But I think if you can try to have a more open kind of like presence and to kind of make it much more comfortable, try to think of it like a maternal, paternal kind of like, if you can, to be as caring, because we still are in a sense kids. I don't want to say we are kids, but we're still pretty young, I'd like to believe.
I would say like having kind of a set idea with regards to solutions to the thing that needs to be fixed is really important going into that conversation. It's also about how you address it. I think if you phrase it as an area of improvement rather than like a struggle point or something along those lines, like if you frame it more positively in terms of a growth perspective, I think it can be interpreted a lot more comfortably by the student. And then like, I think one thing that's also helped me in personal leadership experiences is just like being honest about my own weaknesses. And I think by like showing that everybody needs to improve and like nobody's perfect, it can help people be more comfortable kind of embracing their own struggles and or I'll rephrase that, areas of improvement.
I think pretty similarly, sometimes if you like ask the student to reflect on how they've been feeling about their work, they might bring it up themselves. Because I know like there was one time where like I picked up a shift, forgot that I did because it's not my usual time, and then I completely missed it and was like an hour late to a 2-hour shift, which I knew was like really bad. And so I already felt like really guilty about it. And like they sat me down to talk about it because like they had to. It was a supervisor who like missed a shift, which is like not good. So I already knew going in like it was not going to be like a great conversation, but like it was still handled well because like she could already tell like I felt really bad about it and like knew exactly where I'd gone wrong. And so it was more of a conversation about like, how did this happen? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again going forward? But like it was already aware of like what the conversation was going to be. And I feel like if it's brought up similar to what Sam just said, like one of my clubs on campus uses like strength, area of growth strength to like sandwich it in. And like I feel like it's more beneficial when the strengths you mention aren't just like random positive things, but like things that you think will be useful in correcting or like working towards that area of growth, so that like that student can then know like, okay, like they see I'm able to work on this and that's why they're telling me about it. It's because they can see that I can make this change. They're not telling me this to like put me down and make me feel like I'm incapable, but it's because they think that I'm able to make this change and like see this be successful. So I feel like when that is like emphasized and the student can understand that perspective, it makes a big difference in how they'll take it. And then also with like the punishment side of it, if you just say openly, like, this isn't like a punitive thing, but I want to talk about this so that you can be aware. If students know, they're not going to be like, I don't know, like marked down somewhere negatively about it. If just like a conversation, just like say straightforward, it's a conversation and it's not going to be like recorded as like a discipline thing.
Love all those thoughts. Thank you so much. Anyone else have any thoughts on this before we jump to the next one? Okay, I'm not seeing any unmuting, so we'll move on to our next question from Marcy. I love this question because we have some remote students in our office too. So some of our students work remotely. What are good ways to make sure they still feel supported and connected when not physically in our office? So I'm not sure if any of you work remotely in any capacity and would have some ideas about this question.
I wouldn't say I necessarily work remotely, but I have had opportunities where I could work remotely. For example, winter break. I've been working remotely since the beginning of January, and although that's not a humongous amount of time, I have learned that, check-ins from here to there, whether it's once every few shifts or every shift, really does make an impact of where you are and, the questions that you need to get asked. There are times where you can't really express things very well over like text, especially considering the distance and obviously being online. It's really helpful when you can just hop on to like a Teams meeting or maybe it's pre-scheduled. Yeah, it's really helpful to have that communication. So, and to feel, involved.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, I would say like make sure to keep up with checking in on them and doing so in a method that's really easy. I think like email is easy, but at the same time, it kind of like requires like formatting and whatnot. A simple ping via Microsoft Teams can be done in seconds and make a whole bunch of a difference where it's like, hey, just want to see how you're doing. Like you don't need to have like a set time to do that. You can do that at like random times. And then if the student replies that they need some support, then you can just set up a meeting from there. I think like making sure the communication is streamlined in as easy of a way as possible is what's most important.
Okay. Any last thoughts on this one? All right, we'll move to our next question from Alec. We have received feedback from students at Recwell that you all, want more opportunities and exposure to training on diversity, inclusion, and social justice. Noting there are a lot of different avenues for training students, online staff meetings, forums, etc. What do you want to see within this area of focus? What formats do you want to receive this training?
So D&I is something that's really important to me. I'm pretty active on like the mental health side of things, and I know that there's a lot of disparities with minority populations. So it's something that I've really wanted to make an effort to learn more about. And as part of that, I've been able to work with the School of Business on some of their D&I stuff as like a student org representative, and kind of the demographic statistics with the business school are really disappointing, quite frankly. And I'm sure that probably carries over to Recwell as well. So I think like a good first step is to understand the statistics behind like who Recwell is hiring, what like our like racial makeup looks like. And from there, I think like that was really like the thing that I saw or I learned about the School of Business that really made me say like I need to like step up my game here and like use my leadership capacity to like call for bigger changes. I would say like the online training where it's like those Canvas things where it's just like the recorded videos are really not effective at all. What's most important is that you actually have a conversation and you discuss these topics that aren't always easy to discuss. I think like while it's hard, it really gets the point across and it can make a big difference. I'll put it in the chat, but I'm reading a fantastic book right now called The Conversation by Robert Livingston, who is a professor here. And it talks about how like you can discuss race and racism to really transform organizations. I've found it to be incredibly eye-opening, and one that I think like everybody should be required to read, quite frankly. So I'll drop the name in the chat.
I guess I would also agree that I think online is not too effective. It's nothing against the like that it's set up. I'm sure it's easier that way, but it's just like it makes it a little bit hard to focus. I feel like when you're not feeling that confrontation, like between peers. So I would say in person, but in small groups is what I would personally think, just because if you have too big of a group, I feel like it's just kind of almost too much like going on right there. You need to have like more of a platform to speak. And I think for students that feel more like introverted or they just don't feel comfortable sharing, it's a lot more of a comfortable atmosphere to have like smaller groups at a time. So maybe like a staff meeting, but broken into small groups would be my suggestion.
I feel like the in-person component of it is also important so that you're not just like watching a video and then sitting with your own thoughts and opinions. Like if you're in a group, then you're hearing other people's like perspectives on it, and it might not be the same as yours. And then that's important to like also gain that perspective. And so then like it's just more beneficial to hear more thoughts than not just like think your own thoughts about like the training you watched. And we had like a small group, I think we had like groups like 5 or 6. We did like the diversity training, kind of like a mini seminar. I want to say like in the fall or the summer. I don't know. I can't remember exactly, but it was really good. We did it in the gym at the Nick, and I liked that a lot.
I would also just add on like diversity and inclusion. It sometimes overlooks like ability status. And I think there's like a lot of facilities that still aren't really updated to adequately support people with disabilities. So I would say just like looking around your facility and understanding like, is it easy for somebody who might be in a wheelchair to navigate around here? Is that like something that we could change in a way? That's really important too.
Thank you so much. Those were really great responses. Anyone else have any thoughts
On this before we move to the next question?
I do want to jump in and plug the Office of Student Financial Aid and DEM hosting the Student Employee Diversity Forum. So of course, all students on campus are welcome. So of course, our panelists are welcome. But I highly encourage you as well as supervisors to take a look at the link that Carrie sent. So I appreciate you also mentioning, Sam, about disability, just because we do have members from the McBurney Disability Center presenting and hosting a session there on student employment.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, our next question. As a supervisor, I want to push our interns and give them projects that might be slightly challenging, but also build skills. I'm also aware that they are students first and have deadlines and assignments, plus social responsibilities. Any advice on how to push in a positive way without negative impact or extra stress?
Yeah, I would just say like communicate why you're having them do what you want them to do. And also like when you communicate that why, try to phrase it so it's in their perspective. Like, I want you to do this project so that you can build these skills or you can improve on this or that, putting it as like a reflection of their growth opportunity rather than like your personal benefit is really important for like motivating somebody to undertake a project like that. I also think like doing so while being respectful of the person's other commitments and acknowledging that you're aware of those things is really important. And also like saying that you're there to support them and like reinforcing that it's a group effort, and that given that you're both kind of striving for the same goals with the project, you're here to help each other out. And that's really important as well.
I would also say, just gradually setting up the foundation, for taking on those projects. I feel like, sort of giving a project, like a big challenging project altogether, can be, a little overwhelming and really scary. I think a really good way of handling it is sort of, kind of walking them through it. If that's a choice, maybe doing the first step or maybe some instructions of how to go about it. I know I messed up a few times on my first few projects, but I got the hang of it as I, sort of went along, and I still have, a few bigger projects to take on, but it's not without a little help or a little, a little push.
Great, thank you. Okay, so our next
Question is, how do you feel and how do you respond when a supervisor says we're strict about this policy because we want to set you up for success with employment after college? They might use the term real world as if the one you're in now is fake. How would you feel if your supervisor said that to you, and how would you respond?
I don't feel like I'm told this a lot at work right now, but I feel like when it was said to me like in high school talking about college, it was never accurate. And so I feel like if you're going to say something like this, like if you can like give the example of like where maybe you think this came from, or like why you think this will be important in the future, just because everyone's like future jobs are going to be so different. Just because we all work in the same position now doesn't mean we're going to have the same future roles, and so it might be super different depending on the context that you're going to work in. So maybe like more specifically, like what skill you think that this teaches, or like is it a certain like characteristic or a trait you think that following this now will help you achieve, even if it might apply in different ways. Just like giving that perspective to it rather than just saying like when you're professional you have to do this, when the professional standard in different industries is very different.
I agree completely with that. When you're in high school, you hear that all the time. And I will say it tends to be untrue, but what I was going to say on top of that is that I think any experience in your life, it still teaches you something regardless of if it was, a positive experience or a negative one. So I think that if they tell us that they're strict about this because they're, looking out for us or whatnot, I think in a way that could be true regardless of what that policy is. Of course, if you have a boundary that you are not willing to, move from, then, you should bring that up. And then if it's not working for anyone, then you decide if you want to even stay in that workplace, if they're not willing to accommodate. But so that's another experience that's important for you to, stick to your own boundaries and listening to your gut. So I think that them putting that strict policy is very much the chance for any other employment like that you have. I know there are companies out there that are very strict about certain things, and if you're willing to go through that, then that's on you. But yeah, I think it's still an experience that I think is necessary, whether it's going to question you as a person or if it's, going to push you to have some kind of negative experience or positive.
I think this might not be the answer that you want to hear, but like any policy where you have to use that as like the default reasoning, I think it should be evaluated. I really like the quote, like one who has an answer to why can answer almost anyhow. If you really like are passionate about something, there should be nothing stopping you from pursuing that endeavor and doing it well. I think the same thing goes for this policy application, right? Like if there's a true why, that should be communicated to the students, and like when it's conveyed like that, I think students will listen. If it needs to be reevaluated until you find that why, I think that could be the best course of action too.
I would agree with what everyone is saying. I think hearing that is like the same scope as like when a professor tells you, yeah, I'll tell you about this, but it's kind of beyond the scope of this class, which is something you hear all the time. And it just kind of makes you stop listening, to be honest. So I think like instead of using that phrase, opting instead for like the reason this is important or we're strict about this is because it is something that we care about. Why, like, like just giving more of a explanation in different terms. I just think is like it's just gonna make students listen a lot more, because otherwise it doesn't really make sense to us.
Yeah. Thank you all. I'm noticing the time, and oh my goodness, I could hear you guys talk about your experiences and share your wisdom for a lot longer. But we are closing in on 3:30. So we're gonna pause the panel here. I sincerely want to thank each one of you students for being willing to take an hour out of your winter break and be here and share your insights, and also just for the ways that you've answered the questions so thoughtfully and so thoroughly. For the folks who have been able to be here and listen, we will be sending out the recording. So in case you have colleagues who you think would benefit, feel free to pass it along. Or I know I'm probably going to end up listening to it again and taking better notes next time, because there was a lot that I learned today. So yeah, I'm seeing us already doing it. Let's thank you. Let's thank all of the students in the chat. And then I believe we have a quick survey that we're going to end with for folks who are here as supervisors. Is that right, Carrie? Thank you. All right, Carrie has added this to the screen. We are going to go to menti.com again. Across to the top here, there is the web address and then a code that you can enter. And we're asking the same two questions that we've asked in the previous sessions. The first one being about an aha moment that we have had here today during this session, or a win that we think other people would benefit from hearing about. So go ahead and scan that QR code or visit the web address and type in your answers. We'll get to see them in just a minute here.
And I'll just pop in to say that if you clicked that, you'll get the email. You'll get everyone's responses afterward as well, so you can learn from one another afterward too. Just give another minute or so for this first question. So you see that there was value for the students on the panel. That's great to hear. Being able to connect with other students who have the same experience as me. See someone popped in. It was great to hear from the student perspective, the motivations for working on campus, learning what students find valuable versus what I thought they would find valuable. Including disability in discussions is so nice to see, especially things like ADHD that can be hard for others to understand. Interpersonal connections are key. There's a lot that are rolling in here. That's great. Thank you all so much. Just in the interest of time, we're going to switch to, again, acknowledging that there is so much expertise in the room, but a lot of appetite for learning more and connecting to other student supervisors. So we'd like to hear from you so that we can provide professional development opportunities in the future based on what you'd like to see. So what are some topics that you'd like to see covered at future student supervisor events? Please help us out so we can come in community and learn with one another in the future. As you're thinking of more topics, just want to wrap up by saying again, one more time, thank you so much to our student panel. You're phenomenal. You're phenomenal. So much hope for the future for sure. And thank you to Jen and Brenda and Allie for moderating the session as well. So with that, I'll just go ahead and close up and pass it back to Brenda and Jen.
Thank you, Carrie. And thank you everyone again for taking time out of your day to learn more about our role as mentors for student employees and the We Grow program. I invite you to email us if you have any questions or if you think of any other ideas. And students, we will be connecting with you to thank you offline. But if you also have things that you thought of that you want to re-emphasize or you want to share with supervisors, we'll be sending out follow-up emails to all the supervisors on this call. And so we'd be happy to include any other insights in that if you have other things that come to mind. I think with that, we're all wrapped up for the day. Thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.